Welcome back to the garden in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is actually part 5 of a very detailed garden tour that we're doing, just showing off all the individual perennials and shrubs and trees that we have installed in this garden over the last 3 years of this garden project. It's been well documented on YouTube. There's a playlist called New House if you want to go back to the very beginning, to the start of this and see where it started and where it is today. But we're basically going to go through each plant and just kind of go, you know, how it's performed in the garden thus far. There was a video that went up about transplanting peonies a couple of years ago. All of them have responded well to that. They were all divided. Here in the south, where the foliage may look a little better, you know, in the north through a little more of the summer, here in the south they come up pretty quick in March and get to blooming almost by our frost-free date around April 15th, and then they're already retreating back, and normally have retreated back a little more, but we've had some cool nights at this point. In part 4 or part 3 of this tour, there were a couple more peonies that have been added to the other side, and I failed to point them out because they're this big. They'll be much larger next year after they go to sleep and come back. This might be my favorite encore azalea right here. This is Autumn Lilac. It is a lavender purple flower, bloomed once in the spring already and was completely covered. If you follow us over on Instagram at HortTube, you can see this thing in absolute full flower. It's putting on some growth right now, and come October or so, it will come back into full bloom again. We may get a few residual flowers even during the summertime on it. But that one just is so full and so compact. We never have to touch it. Just a really, really easy plant. What I call Cousin It here in the garden has been one of the stars of the garden since we originally put it in. This red bud is called Golden Falls. It's obviously a weeping gold foliage red bud. It's our, it's a native, but in a very, very, very different form. Very large heart-shaped leaves on this particular cultivar, even bigger really than the species, Cercis canadensis, which is our native eastern redbud. It does not bloom as heavily. We get some flowers on it, and on redbuds you get the little pea-shaped flowers on the actual stems all the way down the plant. We get a few flowers on this thing, just really have not seen it flower like our natives do, but you get this all season long. It's one of the fastest growing plants ever. All of this right here is new this year, and it's only June 14th or 15th as I'm filming this. It's got 3 feet of growth on it already this year. We have lifted it up off the ground. We have to lift it up off the ground at least twice a year. It'll grow right down to the ground and start spreading across the ground. There's a Asclepias tuberosa that's in a little too much shade back here. It is flowering, but it's definitely thinner than it would be, if it was out in the front garden in a little more sun. And I don't know that any monarch butterfly is ever going to find it hidden back here, but that's one that just needs to move. When it was planted there, everything else was smaller and it made a little more sense, but it needs to find some more space. We have this little Nandina here, this little fine textured Nandina called San Gabriel. It was stepped on a couple times over the course of this project by me. Yeah, Steph is pointing at me as she's filming this. I back up every time we're filming something. I back up from something and step on it, but it keeps coming back. It's a great little fine textured little Nandina. It should be about this tall already if it wasn't for me stepping on it. And then this is another Autumn Magic ruby Camellia sasanqua. You can see the low habit this one has. It was pruned in a pruning video earlier in the season. It had some pieces up about this tall, and we just chased those down in the plant because we were trying to just keep it as a small specimen. And this one will bloom red, kind of semi-double to double flowers in October, November, December. Moving around to a slightly different angle of the Cousin It red bud back here. This barberry is one that is not released yet. We have several things like that in the garden that have been sent to me, and we're just, observing them like other people. Great, really compact variety. Apparently this one is seed-free, so it's a sterile cultivar, which is good for barberries because they are invasive, especially up in the Northeast. Great color on this thing. We had a a green foliage loropetalum here, and switched the two across the path, and it really changed this spot. This little barberry's really fantastic, great color on it. And here we are, you know, mid-June. Sometimes here in the south, we can start to lose a little color on some of these things that, you know, have a tendency to turn green over the summer. This one still looks really, really great. There's a Wheeler's dwarf pittosporum down here below me. This is a dwarf pittosporum. These will get an orange scented flower kind of on the interior of them. You'll notice we did a butcher job. I did a butcher job putting it back into place this direction. It didn't need any height adjustment really, a couple little cuts, but mostly it had just gotten too wide. It was way over there in the peonies. It was way over here into this barberry. So got that under control. It's in the process of leafing back out and covering that up at this point. There's a Lantana up on the front that's one of the Southern Living Plant Collection ones. Really kind of a peach color Lantana. It just went in. It's been a little cooler than normal, so it's not you know, the Lantana. We've got a couple in the front garden that are a little more mature that have jumped up quite a bit, but the new ones for this year are definitely just kind of sitting there going, hey, where's the heat? What else here? We're not going through all of the containers because we just did some container planting videos, and so if you want to go back and look and see what's in these containers, they were documented about a month ago when they went in. This container back here was not part of that though, and it's got a cool little Cryptomeria in it called Twinkle Toes. I think it's been in the container now 2 years, and that's as big as it's gotten. So there are Cryptomeria japonicas that get 75 feet tall down to this one, little Twinkle Toes, which could probably be kept this size for the next 5 years. So quite a range of size. And then there's some nasturtiums, some lamiastrum in that container. We got quite a few Kufia out here. This is one of them. Again, this is another one that would probably benefit if we would get some warmer days at this point, which we are now. This is probably the warmest morning we've had all season long. And there's an additional white flowering Kufia right out by the front of the bed there. Again, I don't know how many different Kufia we have out here, but they're just the best to get the hummingbirds out here. There's a little ladybug there on the Asian lilies. We've had some deer issues this spring and rabbit issues. Rabbit issues are just kind of ongoing, and they really like those Asiatic lilies. So they're kind of like little soldiers standing there where pieces are missing at this point. We don't spray anything out here. You won't see a whole lot of issues on the foliage on these things. You will see a leaf eaten here or there. It's just not something that concerns us because we've made it a safe space for all their enemies as well. And so there's a balance going on out here, and it's working out pretty well with this many different plants. This is an unorthodox garden design. I mean, I think most people would, use less varieties of things to create spaces like this. We are plant collectors, so it's a very different garden, but we're able to show off lots of things and how they perform. So whereas we might have one of them, you might get 5 of them, right? There's a Salvia right here called Saucy Wine, and it's another one that's a little slow out of the gate this year, but it's one of our absolute favorite salvias. It's a Southern Living Plant Collection one. A giant show off in the garden. By July, that will fill in all of that space that's around it, and it'll be about a foot taller than it is now. We've grown Saucy Red in that same spot before. It's one that's not hardy for us here in Zone 7B, but worth using as a perennial or as an annual because it gets this big in a single season. So where you're going to take, maybe some other annuals that stay quite a bit smaller. If you're looking dollar for dollar, it's a great use of money as an annual. This is Everillo Carex. We've planted several other patches of Everillo Carex in the garden this year. Again, trying to tie things together a little bit better than they currently are. So there's some small ones that we'll see in some other videos, but these are the most mature ones that we have. We actually had to cut these back at the end of this past winter, because they got a little more damage on them than they normally would from that December freeze. But normally we don't have to cut them back. Normally they stay pretty clean here. Most everybody watching can grow these. Part shade is kind of best on them. Really, man, what a pop of color that is. This is a dwarf loropetalum called Purple Daydream. Probably is the best dwarf loropetalum at this point, and you can really tell this one's dwarf because every branch will come up and then immediately weep down. So You'll see some of the others that you're kind of told that they stay small. If you see any of that spiky growth coming up on them, they're going to get big for sure. But every single time one comes up, it just immediately falls over on Purple Daydream. This one has an almost red frilly flower in the spring, and then we'll get some more flowers, a few here and there during the summer, and then it'll come almost back into full flower in the fall when the nighttime temperatures cool. There's an Agastache behind me. This is Blue Fortune Agastache. This is probably, of all of the ones that we grow out here in the garden, and we'll see a couple more, probably the most vigorous of all. And it's I believe this one is a combination, a hybrid between a native one from the US and one from Korea, if I'm remembering that correctly. And it's created this really, really vigorous plant. Probably no better plant in the garden for pollinators, really. We're in the process of adding lots of ground covers out here, trying to reduce the amount of mulch that we're using. The one over onto the slight right of the camera there is Sunshine Gold Veronica. It's actually a dwarf Veronica. It's already starting to take a little bit of space. It was quite a bit smaller than that when it went in. And then this is a sedum called Fine Leaf Gold. Again, some of these sedums can get a little wacky out here in the garden, but these gold ones tend to be a little more easy to control. This salvia, the purple salvia that you're looking at, is the Salvia nemorosa, and we have caradonna out in the front garden. We have a white one, we have kind of a pinkish one, and then this purple one that you'll see in these. These nemorosas are great. They bloom early for us, and we can cut them back and get a few more residual flowers out of them, but really they're out here because they're one of the earliest flowering perennials that we can get up out of the ground and growing and get something up to the pollinators as quick as possible. There's a little balloon flower planted just to the right of that. It hadn't done a whole lot yet. It was in a tiny little pot and just went in. There's some gaps out here. Okay, so we definitely lost a few perennials during that December freeze. That's been one of those things of discovery. We've had a couple things come up here and there over the last few weeks and go, oh, okay, it's not dead, but there are definitely some things missing out here, and been going back through the little drawings of, make sure you're documenting what you're putting in the ground, because with these things that go completely to sleep in the winter, it's hard to remember what it was or where it's missing, or not to dig it up during the winter if you're planting in those spaces. But we definitely lost a few things out here, and we're in the process of trying to plug some things back in now. I just mentioned that we have detailed maps of everything that's out here in the ground, including bulbs that have already gone to sleep, that bloomed earlier in the season, but you can see some X's on there. Those are things that got marked out that have not come back, so we're assuming are gone from that December freeze. And then from that, new things will go in, and then the map can be redrawn for next year if we want to. I'm not talking a lot about the annual borders here because, again, just like the containers, the annuals went in pretty detailed videos a few weeks back. This Summer Jewel Salvia is just wild. It is absolutely amazing. We have the pink, white, and a lavender one out here. There was a lavender one somewhere in there. Oh yeah, I see it back here. I think you can maybe see the bees that are on it. What you can't see is all the tiny little things that are flying around it. It's just, we're out here filming at 7 in the morning. This is very early. They start early on these and finish late, and they just work them all day long. We've got natives. I think Steph is on a native bee over there. We've got honeybees. We've got little non-stinging wasp. This Summer Jewel Salvia is just the best. There's another annual salvia that's blended into it. But, they're quite showy here in full bloom. I always talk about they're not as showy as some others, but if you mass plant them to this point, they are pretty dang showy. We'll take about a third of this group and cut it in a week or so. Because it's like in peak bloom now. We'll take about a third, cut it back. The next week we'll take another third, the next week we'll take another third. That way we're never taking this entire group away from them, but that little bit of shearing we do on them puts them back into a growth cycle, and they come back out of that really quickly, and the bees are right back on them again. A few more salvia. This is one of the best ones we have out here for the hummingbirds. This is Skyscraper Pink. and it has been a winner thus far. There's a honeybee in this one over here. It's interesting, our native bees figure these salvias out. They have the long tubes like this, and they don't have anything to go in there, so they'll just come right to the back of the flower at the calyx and drill a hole in there. This honeybee seems determined to try to get in there, and he's managed to do it a bit, but our native bees have figured out just to drill a hole in the back of it. This is Salgoon Spencer Lake, interrupting that native bee. And now he's actually going in there that way too after I said that, but normally they'll come right to the back of them and drill a little hole in there just to cheat the system a bit. I love so many of these salvias now. The flower part's beautiful, but then what remains afterwards, the calyx back here, is also beautiful. So it looks like it's still in flower even when it's not. All of these pollinator plants like this, at some point, these long blooming ones, we'll give them a haircut during the summer. And that will, again, regenerate them throughout. But we never take off, more than a little bit at the time. There's a yarrow back here called Red Shades. We're definitely leaning in to a few more yarrow out here. They're all very reliable. And again, when you have, I got some sort of little pollinator that decided to, took off that flower. When you have rabbit problems and you have deer problems, sometimes, you're best to just lean into it a bit and get the things that they won't mess with as much. In the last video, we saw all of our seedling dahlias back here by the fence, and they're all single flowers with all the flower parts exposed in them, and they're great for pollinators. I mean, really great for pollinators. Over here, we have a few of the hybrids, and some of them are full doubles. These are small compared to what they'll be later in the summer. These will get about twice this big. There's a bee sleeping in the edge of it, but that's about all the bees are going to be able to get out of this flower, because you can't really get down in there to the flower parts. This one I can a little bit, but the singles over there are better. These are for kind of humans, and those are for the bee. There are a couple Amsonia out here, and things are growing up around them, but they bloomed earlier in the season. Really great blue flowers. That one's called Blue Ice. We have another one a little further down the line. So that was one of the early flowering perennials out here. And now the dahlias are coming up around them, and Agastache and the more summer flowering, heat tolerant things like the Agapanthus as well. This Golden Jubilee Agastache is just the coolest plant. We have another one out in the front. I'm disturbing the bees on it right now. Incredible gold color, incredible, the kind of lavender flower up against that chartreuse foliage. It's just amazing. This one's also extremely hardy. We've had this one come back every single time without any problem. Some of the others, not so much. But you can see how alive this little space that I'm standing in, every single thing is loaded up with pollinators. Some things a little later in the day. For some reason, the Agapanthus they're not on them in the morning. So middle of the day, these will be covered, and for whatever reason, it's early in the morning. It's the ones out there on the front row. So here's an example of some deer damage. They love these upright phlox. It's kind of funny because and you can tell it's deer because it's bitten from the top rather than eaten up from the bottom, like this Liatris just over to the left. This is the deer damage from the top. That little bit of nibbling down on the bottom is rabbits. A lot of these are native perennials, and it's a lot of the native perennials that take a lot of the damage, which is kind of interesting. This is Everwhite Agapanthus. This is Indigo Frost. Really quite striking. These have been reliable out here in the garden. Again, they need well-drained soil, so in the wintertime, they can't sit in water at all, or they definitely won't come back here in our Zone 7 garden. Here's a PowWow White Echinacea. The one you're going to see out by the road is quadruple this size, and I'll explain more about it when we get out there, because a lot of these perennials are quite a bit more vigorous out there in the front garden. A dwarf Agapanthus. This one's called Little Blue Fountain. Hasn't started opening any yet. This one will flower all summer long once it gets started, but you can see the foliage is quite a bit thinner on it than some of the others, and the flower spikes are a little shorter, but it gets lots of them. The flower count, you can see the flower count's a little higher. in one versus the other, but this one will end up just putting on a giant show during the summertime. Also one that's been very, very reliable coming back. There's most of the bulbs at this point we've cut back. They finished for the season. There's a few in here that haven't been. This is an allium that came up and bloomed. The alliums are interesting because they'll come up with the foliage and then start to put the flower spike up, and by the time the flower's in full bloom, the foliage is dying back. So we are left with these little spikes right here. Probably could collect the seed on these, but this will get cut back pretty soon. There's a Miss Lemon Abelia. We'll see Radiance Abelia out in the front garden. It stays a little more compact than Miss Lemon does. But Miss Lemon is coming into flower right now. You can see this kind of pinkish white flower. Another one that the pollinators just absolutely go crazy for. This area right here, the amount of bees per square foot is just kind of wild, and it's all day long in this space. This needs a little bit of pruning. It's in a little more shade than it would like, but it does fine in the shade. The back line back here puts shade over this by about 2 in the afternoon. The way we'll prune this is we'll just chase these pieces back down into the plant in a week or two, and then it'll be back into that mounding habit for the rest of the summer. There's an interspecies hybrid hydrangea back here that it's another one of these plants that are out here in this garden that we've been taking a look at, and we planted way before it's actually out on the market. And so these are going to be interesting. This is the kind of the future of hydrangeas, is we're going to see some interspecies hybrids between, to hopefully eliminate some of the leaf spot issues that we see in some hydrangea macrophylla, extend the bloom time, interesting flower shapes and sizes, interesting because all the flower parts are in the middle of this one, and so the pollinators are going to be able to enjoy it. It's just started to bloom, and this one will just kind of bloom all summer long. So we're going to see a lot more of these hybrid hydrangeas coming to the market. We skipped over to the back of the bed to kind of catch up with where we were on the front of the bed back there. This is Miss Mykah Hosta, which you see the flower spikes are about to come on it. We have a big Hosta collection here, and if you look at this whole series of videos, you're going to see a lot of Hosta. There's one called Dream Queen right here. Again, it's just finishing up flowering. And then down here below that, there's a Miss Honey oak leaf hydrangea. It was actually stepped on and has come back out from it. All of these things obviously need to be rearranged. That Hosta right there will probably flip to another spot. And then this Acanthus, we have a couple issues with this Acanthus. Number one, it's crowding things out. Okay, so it needs to slide over or go somewhere else in the garden. Maybe it'll go back to this back line. So a little bit of rearranging needs to take place here. When the things went in, they were fine. The other issue with this Acanthus is I don't think it's getting quite enough sun. There's a delicate balance with these Acanthus. These big giant leaf things like this cannot take very much direct sun, or they wilt really badly every afternoon. And if they go in too much shade, you get the big beautiful leaves and no flowers. And so I think we're just a little bit too far into the shade with it. Great foliage, right? But no flowers at all. The flower spikes on these are just wild. They've got thorns on every part of them, including the flowers. Really kind of just a fun plant in general. But again, a little rearranging needs to take place here. There's another Farfugium here. These will bloom Octoberish, yellow flowers up on top of them. I was just in the process of mulching the beds back here and ran this one over a few times with the cart, which is the reason it has a flat edge on this side, which is totally fine. It didn't hurt it at all, no big deal. This is a fastigiate Chinese fringe tree called Tokyo Tower. I've shown it several times on the channel at other nurseries. Really love this plant. The regular Chinese fringe tree can get very wide, very, very wide, probably slightly wider than tall, actually. Of course, we have a native fringe tree that's absolutely fantastic as well. This one is this line just gets to the, it has a little more shade in it than we originally thought. We planted one of these on a landscape job. It's like a 5-part landscape installation series that we did not that far from here. The Tokyo Tower we put in, that one was in absolute full bloom in the spring. It's only this tall, and was just covered in flowers. This one had almost no flowers whatsoever, but the growth has been fantastic on it, and it's a beautiful tree. It has beautiful foliage. I think we're maybe, as it gets a little bit taller, it's going to reach up into the sunlight, and I think you can see there's a little sunlight on top of it right now. The sun comes up over the house this direction. As it gets a little taller, it's going to buy itself an extra hour and a half of sunlight probably every day, and maybe bloom at that point. Who knows? This is a Japanese maple called Tamukeyama. It's a very common weeping, dark foliage Japanese maple. I contorted this one years ago, and I'm in the process of contorting another one that's in a container. It caused the tree no bodily harm. It's been a very well-loved tree, but it has a very, very interesting trunk. I probably need to do a little bit of pruning on it at this point to expose a little more of the view of the trunk, because it's kind of hidden away by the foliage right this minute. The pittosporum that you're looking at down here is Mojo. This is a Southern Living Plant Collection, low-growing evergreen plant. I've had it in a video recently on evergreen plants for the shade that will stay under 2 feet, or you can keep under 2 feet. This is a great example of that. All three of these look just perfect, as you can see. They'll get kind of an orange scented flower on them that's, you know, down in the plant, so it's not a noticeable thing, but it is fragrant. Just a great plant. We've got it interplanted with some ajuga that is a purple foliage ajuga. It needs, for some reason, it's gotten a little bit thin in the middle over there. I don't know if something's been messing with it or not. I have no idea what's going on there. Back over this direction, we've got a Hosta called Island Breeze. This is one of the only Hosta we have multiples of. I think we may have liked it so much that we bought it again without remembering we had actually purchased it. It's got a little bit of slug damage on it, I'm noticing right there, and a couple things back here with a little bit of slug damage on them. Here's a Rhodia japonica. Actually, there's a slug on it right there on that yellow leaf. I need to cut all three of our Rhodia back just a bit to and allow them to reflush out. That December freeze did a little bit of damage to them that they're not recovering from very quickly. So again, I'm just gonna, some of these things you can choose to cut back or not to cut fully back. That's one of them that I think I'll just go off with its head. All the new growth will come back clean on it. So I think you can see overall, the things that have been put into this garden, you know, have responded well over the last 3 years, and they're, you know, performing beautifully. But I just want to point out in these videos, you know, that not everything goes perfect in any garden ever. You know, again, we've lost some perennials to the winter freeze. You see some slug damage back there on the back. You know, life happens, right? And Holly's out here guarding the garden from the rabbits this morning, but she's not taking good care. She's not taking care of the slugs for some reason. So there you go. That is the I think the end of part 5. That was only half of this center island bed in the back garden. So we'll pick up in the next video right there.